A tomato patch can fool you for weeks. You watch green fruit swell under the leaves, then one red tomato turns up, and you carry it into the house like a prize. July lays 3 hot days across the garden, and suddenly you cannot see the kitchen table for the basket sitting on it. That is the moment a tomato stops being only supper. Now it is a question of time. The old answer was never as simple as putting everything in a jar. The jar came near the end. First, somebody had to pick before the fruit split. Somebody had to sort it before one soft tomato spoiled against the next. Water had to be carried. Jars, lids, knives, cloths, kettles, and fuel had to be ready. Then the hottest work of the day had to happen in a kitchen already holding July heat. And every tomato on that table did not belong in the same place. Set one basket here with me. The firm, sound tomatoes may be right for a tested canning process. The best slicers can stay out for supper while their flavor is at its peak. A bruised tomato that is still wholesome moves to the front of the line and gets cooked promptly. A moldy or spoiled one does not become thrifty just because we hate to lose it. So here is the first useful answer. Sort before you preserve. Then choose where the food is going before you decide how to season it. A tomato meant for tonight has one set of choices. One going into the freezer has another. A tomato meant for drying has another. If the finished food is going to sit on a pantry shelf, the whole job needs to follow a current tested process. I am not going to hand you a secret family recipe and pretend it speaks for every mountain kitchen. There was never one Appalachian formula, and an old memory cannot settle every modern safety question. I want to ask something more useful. What had to happen between a basket of ripe tomatoes and a dependable pantry shelf? We will follow that basket all the way through. We will see why Tomato Day needed an order, what the glass jar changed, why the sound of a lid sealing is not the whole safety test, and which part of the old skill still belongs in a modern kitchen. The garden has already made some choices for us. We need to look closely enough to notice them. Tomatoes do not come through the door with the same job written on them. A big juicy slicer is a fine thing beside beans and cornbread, but it carries a good deal of water. A paste tomato has more flesh and fewer seeds, so it takes less cooking to make a thick sauce. Small tomatoes behave differently again. Variety, ripeness, weather, and plant health all affect what lands on the table. The plant's growth habit changes the work too. Some determinate tomatoes set much of their fruit in a shorter period. An indeterminate vine may keep flowering and producing through the season. Either one can give you more than supper needs, but a concentrated set can turn one warm week into a real call to work. That is why preserving begins in the garden. Pick sound fruit. Once it is off the vine, keep it out of hard sun. Do not heap ripe tomatoes so deeply that their weight crushes the ones underneath. At the table, sort them twice, once by condition and once by use. This first basket is for eating now. These are the tomatoes you waited for all winter, fragrant and tender and better left alone than fussed over. The next basket is for prompt cooking. A small bruise does not always ruin wholesome fruit, but it moves that tomato ahead of the others. Trim it and use it while it is still sound. The canning basket holds firm, disease-free tomatoes suited to the tested product you have chosen. Then there is the discard pail. Rot, mold, and doubtful spoilage do not belong in the kettle. Waste hurts when seed, hoeing, staking, and water went into a crop. Still, thrift never meant saving every last thing. It meant knowing what could serve the household and what could not be trusted anymore. Once the sorting is done, give the room a direction. Old kitchens did not all look alike. A household might have had a broad work table, a little table and a bench, or boards laid across supports for the day. Some moved the hottest work to a summer kitchen or another covered place. Whatever the room looked like, dirty produce needed to keep moving forward instead of crossing back over clean jars and finished food. Unwashed tomatoes come in at one end, washing and trimming follow, then comes preparation for the exact product. Hot jars and the canner need to be placed where nobody is reaching across another person's hands. Finished jars need a protected spot where they can cool without being shifted for supper. It sounds ordinary because it is ordinary. That plain order is what keeps a large job from turning into confusion. There was another limit too. A household could preserve only what it had containers, fuel, time, and appetite to use. Food nobody wanted was not a victory just because it filled a shelf. The table told you which jobs were worth doing again. Before we follow the heat, look at the jar. Glass changed what a household could see, seal, store, and count. Food was stored long before mason jars lined a pantry shelf. Households dried, salted, fermented, and smoked food. They used crocks, barrels, lofts, cellars, and whatever cool places the property offered. Glass did not invent preservation. It did give home canners a useful new tool. The mason jar entered the American market in the late 1850s. Ball began making fruit jars in 1884. Closures changed over time. There were glass lids, wire bales, zinc caps, rubber rings, and eventually the familiar two-piece lid. A surviving jar can help us date the object. It cannot tell us exactly what one family put inside it or whether the process they used would meet today's guidance. Glass let people see the contents. A standard jar could be washed, filled, processed, cooled, checked, labeled, counted, and opened later. Rows of the same size helped with planning too. A glance could tell you whether 6 quarts of tomatoes remained or only 1. By the early 20th century, organized rural instruction was also teaching canning across the country. Home demonstration agents and girls' tomato clubs taught gardening, food preparation, and food preservation. The Smith-Lever Act of 1914 supported cooperative extension work. Those programs did not arrive in empty kitchens and invent rural knowledge. Women already knew how to manage food, fuel, weather, and household labor. Organized instruction brought equipment, standardized directions, public demonstrations, and another way for updated information to travel. We have to be honest with the records. A Tomato Club report from Arkansas tells us about Arkansas. A Farm Security Administration photograph made in Washington or South Carolina documents the place named in its caption. It does not become an Appalachian kitchen because the clothing or jars look familiar. Those records can help us understand the larger canning movement, as long as we leave people where history put them. Inside Appalachia, access to stores, available cash, roads, and household means affected how quickly equipment arrived. A family might buy new lids and reuse sound jars. Neighbors traded. Older closures stayed in use. Some homes had pressure equipment and some did not. Nostalgia can flatten all of that into one tidy room, but there was never one Appalachian pantry. A coal camp household, a small farm, a town home, and a remote mountain place did not have the same garden, income, stove, or storage. Even close neighbors made different choices. They still faced the same ripe basket. The food would not wait for a perfect kitchen or a free afternoon. The jar helped, but only when the work behind it was right. Clean glass by itself cannot preserve a tomato. A lid cannot make one safe. Preparation, acidity where required, heat, time, and careful handling all belong to the process. This next part needs plain speech because an old practice and current safety guidance are not always the same thing. People often say tomatoes are acidic. That statement is true, but it is not a complete canning instruction. Tomatoes sit near an important acidity boundary. Current research-based guidance calls for acidification when whole, crushed, or juiced tomatoes are canned under the referenced USDA procedures. The tested directions name the acid and the amount. Depending on the procedure, that may be bottled lemon juice or citric acid. Vinegar of the specified strength is also an option in that guidance, though it may change the flavor. Please do not try to memorize a number from a story told in a video. At the stove, choose a current tested recipe for the exact product and follow that source from start to finish. There is a reason the details matter. A shelf-stable jar is a low-oxygen place. Heat processing must control the organisms the process was designed to control. Acidity changes which hazards can grow and how heat works against them. Product thickness, the size of the pieces, the amount of liquid, jar size, packing method, and altitude can all affect a tested process. So an extra handful of peppers, onions, squash, or herbs is not a harmless improvement to a shelf-stable tomato formula. Those additions can change acidity and heat movement. Put extra seasoning in at the table, or select a tested recipe that already includes what you want. A listed pressure canning option does not give us permission to ignore the rest of the directions. In USDA tomato procedures that require acidification, those preparation steps still apply when the listed pressure option is used. The method matters as much as the ingredient list. Open kettle canning and oven canning are part of preservation history, but current authorities do not recommend them. A hot jar with a lid pulled down is not the same as a jar that completed a tested heat process. Think through the whole system. Begin with sound fruit. Prepare it as the tested directions say. Use the named jar size and pack. Add the required acid. Leave the specified headspace. Remove bubbles when directed. Clean the rim. Apply the lid correctly and process for the full time with the altitude adjustment for your location. If a boiling water canner stops boiling during processing, current West Virginia University guidance says to bring it back to a vigorous boil and begin the timing again. When processing is finished, let the jars cool undisturbed. West Virginia University directs home canners to leave them for 12 to 24 hours before checking the seal. Do not press a lid while the vacuum is forming. Do not tighten the bands while the jars cool. That little ping is satisfying. It means the lid pulled down. It cannot reach backward and prove that the recipe, acidity, jar size, or processing time was correct. Keep a record beside the jars. Write down the product, date, tested source, and enough batch information to answer your own questions later. Old household judgment and modern research can work together here. Judgment tells you to start with sound food, prepare the room, respect the heat, and keep track of the work. Research tells you which tested process controls the risk for the product in your hands. Suppose the garden gives you 3 baskets tomorrow morning. You do not have to make the same thing from every tomato. First, look at the meals already coming. Keep enough good slicers for the next few days. Cook the sound fruit that needs attention soon. Share some while it is still a gift worth receiving. Then be honest about your time, equipment, freezer space, tested recipes, and what the household will actually eat. Freezing is useful when the future dish can accept a softer tomato. Drying makes a different ingredient and needs its own current directions. Sauce, juice, whole tomatoes, salsa, and mixed products are not interchangeable jars. Each one needs its own tested path. If this is a canning day, set up before the fruit is halfway prepared. Read the complete directions first. Check the jar sizes on hand. Check your altitude. Make sure the required acid is on the table. Examine the jars. Gather the jar lifter, funnel, timer, clean cloths, and enough fuel to finish the process without interruption. Give the work a direction. Tomatoes enter dirty and leave clean. Knives stay near the trimming work. Hot jars remain hot until filling. Place the canner where steam will not trap somebody against a wall. Keep children and loose sleeves away from boiling water. Give cooling jars a spot where nobody will need to slide them aside for supper. Do not make an enormous batch just because the garden made an enormous pile. A smaller batch finished with attention is better than a kitchen pushed past what it can manage. Flavor deserves the same honesty. Preserve what the table will use. One household wants plain tomatoes for soup. Another reaches for sauce. Another uses juice. If a certain jar keeps coming back unopened, pay attention. Make less of it next summer. After the jars cool, follow the tested guidance for checking seals, removing screw bands, washing, labeling, and storage. Keep the batch record with the recipe source. Then clean the room before you call the job done. Tomato skins cling to the floor. Seeds find the seam beside the table. A kettle leaves a ring. Canning day includes the washing after the jars have gone quiet. There is no need to turn that into poetry. It was work. There was satisfaction in it, though. A table covered in ripening fruit became a row of food with a known purpose. You could see what was finished and what remained. The next basket felt less threatening because the work had an order. That order, more than any one recipe, is the old practical skill worth remembering. A pantry shelf can make a summer's labor look still. The jars stand in a row, the glasses cool. You cannot see the steam, wet aprons, peelings, sore feet, carried water, or stove heat anymore. That is why I hesitate when somebody calls the old way simple. The tools were often simple, the labor was not. The knowledge was not simple either. Somebody judged ripeness, spoilage, weather, fuel, appetite, container supply, and the rest of the season. Somebody kept the job moving while meals and ordinary chores continued around it. Those jars do not prove that people in the past knew every safety fact available now. They do show that families understood perishability. A ripe crop opened a short window, and household order could turn some of that brief abundance into food for later. We can respect the work without copying every old method. Keep the calm sorting table. Choose a use before good food declines. Keep the workstations, labels, and batch record. Make what the household will eat. Then pair those habits with a current tested process from the National Center for Home Food Preservation, USDA, or your university extension service. That does not push tradition aside. It lets good judgment travel forward with better evidence. When the tomatoes come in all at once, do not begin with the biggest kettle you own. Begin with one sound basket and one honest decision. Which part of Tomato Day do you remember most clearly? Was it peeling at the table, turning the food meal, listening for lids, or washing the kitchen after everybody else had gone to bed? Tell me in the comments. The work around the jar is often where the family story stayed. Next time, we will take a cucumber from the vine and ask why one pickle stayed crisp while another went soft in the crock. Until then, take good care of what the garden gives you and take good care of yourself.